So what does this actually look like? And the first and foremost thing is something that a lot of people aren't saying that they really should be, because I think it's still something that even most what we call conservatives are uncomfortable with saying, is that fathers need to stay in the home, or at least near to it. Because really, mothers are a given at this point. Yes, we all know that a mother should stay in the home. Everybody knows that at this point. Everybody's heard that. But a father needs to stay in the home too. The primary reason for this is that a man's image of God and of his government is ultimately formulated by his father. He perceives his God and his government ultimately in the same way that he perceives his father. So his God and his nation.
Mm-hmm.
This is why patriotism is a virtue that is in keeping with the fourth commandment of honor thy father and thy mother. Because patriotism, the very root of the word patriot is pater, which is father. Patriotism is the honoring of your fatherland and of your father nation. And that sometimes even means if the man ruling it is wicked, you still ought to fight for it because you are fighting for your neighbor and for your family immediately. But if you need further proof of this, for one thing, there's the Michael Knowles point that basically all of leftism is just F you dad. It's just a bunch of people who hate their dads, usually for no reason, other than they've been brainwashed by people who have actual bad fathers and hate to be alone. And two, Martin Luther had a terrible father. And he thus had a twisted image of God. He was never good enough for his father. His father constantly beat him down, constantly told him that he wasn't good enough. His first homily that he ever preached as a priest resulted in a standing ovation from the entire congregation. They thought it was brilliant. But after Mass, his father said, "Yeah, that other guy did the same thing better," deliberately compared him to his rival, and placed him beneath a rival, an intellectual rival, and immediately started critiquing him of how it could have been better. And a lot of people have been through this. My spiritual director once told me when he was a boy, he had a model plane set kit that he put together. And he got probably 90% of the way finished with it. And then he took it to his dad. He basically just had to paint it, and then that would have been it. And he took it to his dad. And the first thing his dad had to say when he saw it was a critique of how to make it better, rather than looking at the light in your little boy's eyes and saying, "Oh my goodness, you have done a fantastic job." And what my spiritual director said after that was, I then took it and put it in a box and I never looked at it again. So if that is your image of your father, that all he's ever going to do is tell you that you're not good enough, ultimately, you're going to start thinking that God is always going to think that you're not good enough, because God is the father of all. God is the father of man. This is why children need to actually know their fathers, and their fathers need to be good men. And even if their fathers aren't that good of men, they need to be they actually do need to know their fathers still. Because then, if your father is a good man, then you'll have a good view of God. You'll have a good image of God in your mind. But if your father is not a good man, then there's a decent chance that as you grow up, you will be proven wrong. And you will see that God is much better than your father actually was. Then there's a whole bunch of other factors that can affect you. But whether a father is good or bad, his children ought to know him. Because if he's bad and they don't know him and they think he's good, and then they later find out he's bad, they're going to think that was all a lie and that everybody's lying about everything and that everybody is truly evil, and they'll become cynical. But if he's good and they don't know him and they just think he's kind of meh, then they grow up and they meet a whole bunch of people with bad fathers, and they start to think that their father was exactly like theirs, like all their friends' dads. all their friends who had really crappy fathers. They start imprinting somebody else's view of fatherhood on their own dad. And then they wind up hating their father. And this is why leftism is able to take hold, because these children don't actually know their fathers. Because brainwashing and intellectual rape only happen when there's not really much there to begin with. You cannot have a genuinely good image of your father that is solidified by genuine knowledge of your father and a genuine good relationship with your father, and also then be convinced by a college professor that your father is a terrible man. Those things don't go together. The only way that college professor or that group of friends is able to convince you that your father is terrible is because you don't actually know him. And you probably don't actually know him because society has told him that he needs to be at work all day and that he needs to work across town from you and that you are basically never to actually see him. So at this point, the only people that have turned out all right are either the specific glorious cases or those whose fathers actually made an absolute concerted effort to leave home as soon as the clock ran out and spend as much time with their family as they were humanly able to do.
Yeah, that's the fix right there. It's just you have to be around your family. You can't go to work, constantly change the next promotion for the sake of chasing the next promotion, for the sake of having nicer things, which we'll talk about next,
Mm-hmm.
and care more about your lawn than what your son did that day.
And you actually need to put effort into getting to know your children, which is
Mm-hmm.
more than just, oh, what happened at school today, son?
Exactly.
It needs to be more than, how was school today?
Mm-hmm.
And you actually need to get to know your family because your children are different people than you are, and you need to know them. I cannot stress that enough. Know your children. And if your job is getting in the way of you knowing your children, get a different job.
Your kids don't want the nice house, they want you. They don't want the nice car, they want you. If they do want those things more than you, then something has gone wrong and you should not be humoring that. Or inadvertently, because again, we've said before, fathers are doing the best they can. We're not blaming them all for this. But your life should not be set up inadvertently to feed those very things, to feed
Mm-hmm.
those very priorities in your children. And yet, that's the way modern life is kind of set up. Got to get the next thing.
Yeah.
Got to get all these
You have
things.
far too many children who were raised with fathers who were mentally, physically, emotionally, or spiritually absent in their home, or all of the above. And, far too many kids remember their dad. The only time your dad ever talked to you was to yell at you about something, or to tell you to go away, or to tell you not to bother him, or to tell you to ask your mother. Far too many children have been raised in homes like that, and far too often I hear this idiotic speech of, you ungrateful brat, be happy that your dad worked as hard as he did so you could have nice things.
Kids not
I
ungrateful for
understand your
wanting different things.
I understand the plight. I understand that even though you may not necessarily say it, you wanted you didn't want the nice things, you wanted your father. You wanted your father to answer the question about baseball when you were 7. You wanted your dad to show up to your basketball game when you were 14. It's also worth mentioning at this point that simply physically being there is not enough. You must also show your children physical affection, because physical affection from a mother is very important, and it's extremely damaging when children don't get
Hmm.
good physical affection from their mother, um, because it's just a natural thing. If you take basically any mammal, any other mammal on the planet, mothers are incredibly physically affectionate. They snuggle with their young, they hold their young tight. It's a natural thing for mothers to be physically affectionate. And it is for fathers too, but it is I don't know really how to word it. It's more of a subtle type of necessity. It's more obvious that mothers are physically affectionate than that a father should be. I remember uh, listening once to Dr. Ray Garendi's radio show, and he related a story when his son Peter, his second youngest, who is now, I think he's our age,
Okay.
uh, when he was in high school, he was 14, 15, 16, somewhere around there. He had a basketball game, and Dr. Ray, before the basketball game, goes up to his son, gives him a big hug and a kiss on the neck, and says, kid, don't stink up the court. And then he goes to his seat. And after the game, on the way home, his son told him, Dad, all the other guys were talking in the locker room, and every single one of them said that they wish that their dad had done that before the game. So, no, it's not necessarily good enough that your son sees you in the stands. It's not necessarily good enough that your daughter sees you in the audience at her piano recital. What you ought to do is look your child in the eye and say, I love you and I am proud of you and you can do this.
I'm reminded of a story from Matt Fradd that he shared on Pints of the Aquinas before. Well, it's not a story, it's just a thing. But, what is holiness, basically? Holiness would be really easy if it was ritualistic.
Mm-hmm.
Holiness would be really easy if it was pray these 5 prayers at set times of the day. But that's not what holiness
You
is.
mean
Holiness
you
is,
mean like Islam?
yeah, well, there's a reason it's false. But anyway, what holiness actually is love your wife and be patient with your children and be there for them. And yeah, don't yell when you shouldn't yell and this other stuff. Like that's much harder than the ritualistic option, but it's what it is. That's the only way you reach its fullness. The same thing applies here to the family. It'd be really easy after a fashion if it was just, well, I just got to provide and then show up and then take care of my stuff, and make sure my kids have a roof over their heads and have the toys that they want and all this other stuff. But no, it actually means in the midst of chaotic modern living, I've got all these thousand things in my head that I can somehow tune that out because Johnny came up to me and said, "Would you play ball with me?" Or because he asked, "Why is orange a color?" You
Or
actually
he comes up and
and
he asks, is the fruit named after the color or is the color named after the fruit?
and then as a good dad, you actually have a decent little discussion with him about that. A good back and forth.
If you're like Tolkien, you come up with an entire fairy tale as to the man that created the orange, and the man that discovered it, and the man that created the color orange, and about the great journey that the man took on his road to discovering an orange and naming it.
Mm-hmm.
But that's
But
only
that,
if you're Tolkien. You don't have to do that.
but when you do that for your son after coming back from the day, like you just gave more value to your family in that one moment than you did the entire day at work. Which isn't to say that work isn't important, but it means as I was talking with Ethan in our prep for this, that the macro has to serve the micro. Like the job is important, obviously, but it's important because it has to serve these other moments and make those moments happen. It can't take
your
away from
your
them.
work is a means. Your work is the means to the end. It is not the end itself.
Exactly.
You're having a roof over your family's heads and food in their stomachs is not necessarily the end. That is the means to the end of you being a good father.
Mm-hmm.
That is something that must be done in order for you to be a good father, or to be
No,
trying to build
this is
something
not an
up
option.
so that you can have a roof over your family's heads and food in their stomachs. Like, to reference Matt Fradd again, I remember him saying once that for a while his family lived under a bridge. They were genuinely and literally homeless for a while when his children were very little. And they had nothing, but his children still had him. And I have long said that I would rather my family live under a bridge. I would rather my children be raised under a bridge than not have me. And my wife has said the same thing in fewer words, but then she usually She usually finishes it with, "But let's please not live under a bridge,"
Fair enough.
because that's how a wife ought to be. That does not give you a license to put us under that bridge in the first place.
No, but this is the perfect image, what you've just described.